You, my friend, are institutionalized. And you don't even know it. You've been working so long, saving and investing, that you can't see the outside. You don't know what rockin' retirement means. But that's okay. We're going to help you. Salvation lies within, and you will see the light today on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Hello, my name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement. We are here to help you rock retirement, and we're going to help you see the light and get out of your institutionalized state of mind in our Hot Topic segment. But we are not going to forget that we are in the middle of how to manage IRAs, 401ks, and Roths in retirement. And we're going to talk about Roth conversions in the practical planning segment. But you know what? We can't do any of that until we have that all-important disclaimer. Don't take advice from Roger Whitney unless you're a client who I serve as a fiduciary. Don't take advice from anyone that doesn't know you, and I don't know you. This is helpful hints and education. Before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor. And, you know, this is sort of a tax-heavy topic this month. So remember, I'm not a CPA. I'm very tax-aware, but I rely on CPAs, and you should too, because I don't give tax advice. Now, let's go help you get out of the institution to break the chains in our Hot Topic segment. I am starting to notice more than before a lack of vision when it comes to retirement. When we're dreaming up this ideal retirement. Let me explain. About a month ago or so, I had a conversation with someone, and they were adamant that they wanted to retire today if they could. They were pretty adamant. Made a compelling case. And through some conversation and facilitation, there were some relatively minor adjustments which they acknowledged that they could make that would put them in position to be able, well, to retire today. They acknowledged it, but then it just sort of passed by like a stream. And I tried to bring it back, but they still stayed with their 2 to 3 year plan. The incongruency between wanting to retire today and being adamant about it and then seeing the path and just letting it flow by, I couldn't reconcile those two things. And then in the coming days and weeks, with all the conversations I have with people on this subject, and there are a lot, I noticed it more and more. It was either that, or the other thing that I noticed is the people that were on the other side that had gotten out, had broken the chains, and were in retirement, were changing their plans much more dramatically than you would have thought early on. My conclusion, or part of my conclusion, was that when they made their plans, they were still institutionalized. So that was the paradigm, the mindset that they had. And then when they broke out and got into the outside world, retirement, they had more visibility of what that even meant because they had never been outside the walls. So if you think about it, we are all institutionalized. We've basically had a job since we were like 5 years old and went to school, right? You got to show up on time. You got to perform. You get praise. You get discipline. You get promotions. Same thing. Since you're 5 years old, you've been in that type of system. And so when you get to this age and you're contemplating, quote unquote, retirement, you're institutionalized. How are you supposed to know what that even means to have time freedom and to arrange your life totally on what you want it to be? And it's only limited by your creativity and your resources. How are we supposed to know that? So as a result, we see lots of changes in plans post-retirement as someone gets their sea legs in this new free world. And this makes me think of the movie Shawshank Redemption, which was the story of a man who was convicted, wrongfully so, who was in an institution and interacted with lots of institutionalized, literally, people and refused to be that way. And so what I thought we'd do is go over some of the quotes from that movie and maybe noodle on how they apply to us, and this awareness may be able to help us create a better life. So the first one is from Red, who was played by Morgan Freeman, who had been a long timer and a good friend of Andy, Tim Robbins, the main character. Red said, "These walls are funny. First you hate them, then you get used to them. Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them. That's institutionalized." So by that definition, let's think of work. You got routine. You got to be there 9 to 5 or whatever your schedule is. You got a paycheck. You got quote unquote security. You have a reward system. All of these keep you operating in an environment that you've operated in for decades. That's all you've really known, most likely. You're institutionalized. So you get to retirement and you're supposed to figure out how you're going to organize your life with total time freedom, nothing to show up for, no reward system, no discipline system. How are we supposed to be able to define that? The first step is to be aware of the system that you're in. Another quote from Red. "Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane." A lot of times when we're in the institution, retirement becomes romanticized. You start to dream of the freedom and it releases you, relieves the stress of the day-to-day grind, which can be a beautiful thing. But it can drive you insane a little bit because then you can start to play a game with yourself of, I got all these projects and everything else that I have to do right now. So we'll live then. We will travel then. We will spend time with our kids then, while never finding a way to do it now. I may dramatize it a little bit, but that's how I saw my mom, was delaying all of these things because she was in the institution and there were all these demands being put on her. And so she romanticized life without all those things, but she never really worked to get there, never made intentional decisions to organize her life to get there, and then died early. So I think that's something we got to be fearful of. And I think retirement planning in general sort of supports this, which I think is one of the big downsides of traditional planning. And one of the wise quotes from the movie, well, there are a lot of them, was actually from the warden, Samuel Norton, who was sort of the villain, and he didn't say it with this intent, but salvation lies within. And Andy embraced this, not in the way that the warden meant. Slow, intentional action is powerful. And if you look at Andy in the movie, he maintained his free self while being imprisoned. And he took slow, intentional action to ultimately steal back his freedom. Dug holes, little bits of dirt at a time. A lot of intentionality, slow intentionality that compounded and became very powerful and ultimately allowed him to steal back his freedom. Some of this can be creating a compelling vision of what you would like to do. Andy had the draw of going down to Mexico. He could paint the mental picture. He intentionally created that vision and kept himself even while he was serving the institution and following their rules. It's not about some dramatic action. Retirement doesn't need to be how my wife did it. She came home just up to here, had enough, take this job and shove it. Doesn't mean it can't be done that way. It doesn't have to be that way. You can take slow, intentional action to win your freedom. And then the most famous quote from Andy, get busy living or get busy dying. You are the captain of your life, and make sure you're living in congruence with what you say you want, and take intentional action to make it so, because this is the only life you have. Let's go get practical. So last week on the show, we talked about why we don't want to be ham-handed in how we create our withdrawal strategy, and we want to find a more balanced approach that is very tax-aware to get to some sort of tax equilibrium so we can take advantage of the tax bracket in retirement when we have more control over how we realize things. One way to do that is to do what is called a Roth conversion. So let's set this up and make sure we understand what Roth conversions are, and then talk about some of the considerations around deciding how much, and when you do one. So what is the problem? So here's the problem. Through the decades, you've accumulated substantial assets in tax-deferred accounts like IRAs and 401ks. And now you're sitting here, you're in your mid-50s or you're 60 years old. You have a ton of assets in accounts that you've not paid taxes on. And we talked about the big tax liability that's going to be sitting there. And we know that when we're 70 and a half, Mr. IRS is going to knock on the door and say, hey, start taking some money out and doing those required minimum distributions, and then we won't have any choice. And that can be pretty substantial, right? If you have a $2 million IRA and you're 70 and a half, the factor that you would use is 27.4 this year based on an IRS table, which is about 3.6%. So if you had a $2 million IRA when you're 70 and a half, you're going to have to take out almost $73,000 from that IRA, whether you want to or not. And that's going to impact all sorts of things. Now you're saying, hey, Roger, I don't have $2 million in my IRA. I only have whatever. Well, if you're 60, you still have 10 years of growth, potential growth ahead of you. So these can add up. And then that percentage that you have to take out when you hit 70 and a half is going to go up each year. So that's a problem. The possible solution could be a Roth conversion. So let's talk about what a Roth conversion is real quick. So the IRS says, and again, I'm not a CPA, they allow that if you have money in an IRA, let's say we have $1 million in an IRA that you've not paid taxes on, that you can take all or part of that and convert it into or move it into a Roth IRA, which allows it to grow tax-free forever and does not have required minimum distributions. They will allow you to do that. Doesn't matter how much money you make. There's no income limitations on doing Roth conversions. The catch is you have to pay the taxes on that income in the year that you do the conversion. So in the instance of this $1 million, if we did the whole $1 million and moved from an IRA to a Roth, we'd realize $1 million in taxable income in that year. And then we could either pay the taxes from other monies we have somewhere else, or we could use part of the conversion to pay the taxes. And then that money would go into a Roth. And now it can grow tax-free for the rest of your life. And you won't have required minimum distributions when you're 70 and a half. So you're basically prepaying all of your taxes. So the IRS allows you to do that. That is what a conversion is. Now, this goes against what some CPAs might say of why would you realize taxes before you need to? Keep deferring. And there's a lot of validity to that. But when you're in retirement and you can control your income more than you ever had before in terms of your realized income, there are some opportunities to do some tax arbitrage to mitigate what your tax liability is. Remember that big tax liability we talked about? So what are some strategies that I have seen people do when it comes to moving money from pre-tax accounts, IRAs, to Roths using this conversion? Well, there are people that believe, hey, our tax rates are lower than they've been almost any time in history. If you look at the tax brackets and you look historically, yeah, you could make that argument. So I know people that are aggressively moving as much as they can, as quick as they can, into Roths from IRAs, and they're paying the big tax bill all up front. So if we look at that, if you have a $500,000 in a IRA and you say, hey, I'm going to convert this all at once. Well, you realize $500,000 of income. Well, that's going to put you into the 35% tax bracket. But we got to remember tax brackets, right? So let's take that $500,000. The whole thing isn't taxed at 35%. And we sort of forget that, right? We have an effective tax rate because each bracket taxed the amount that was within that bracket. So the 35% tax bracket starts for a married couple at $408,200. So if I use a handy dandy online calculator, just to be real down and dirty about this, $500,000 would give you an effective federal income tax rate of 23.6%. So yeah, you're in the 35% tax bracket. You've creeped into that, but your effective tax rate is about 23.6%. Your marginal tax rate is 35%. That doesn't sound too bad relative to historical tax. So some people are doing very aggressive Roth conversions, saying, hey, if I can prepay my tax today at 23, 24% effective, and it grows tax-free forever. I don't have required minimum distributions. And my view of the world is that taxes are going to go up in the future or the rules will change. I'm going to take advantage of that. So that is one strategy that I've seen. Another strategy I've seen is much more common, and that are partial Roth conversions. And this is that phrase of filling the bucket of tax brackets. And that's looking at the tax brackets and seeing, like we've talked about, there's a big jump from 12% to 22%. So each year, when you looked at your modified adjusted gross income, hey, if you still have room, let's say your modified adjusted gross income looks like it's going to be about $50,000 after all your deductions and everything else. Well, you got almost $28,000 left in that 12% tax bracket. I'm going to go ahead and do a Roth conversion for roughly $28,000 to fill that bucket before I jump up into the 22% bucket. Or conversely, you can do more because even if you're in the 22% tax bracket bucket, that's still a pretty low effective tax rate. So that is what Roth conversions are. And the way you would go about thinking about that is making a decision on where you want to be. Do you want to be pretty aggressive about it because you're really thinking this is multi-generational assets? So the quicker you can get them into tax-free form, the lower your RMDs are going to be, and the more tax-free growth that you can get? Or do you want to do what's more common, these rolling Roth conversions, which end up being a year-by-year calculation like we talked about last week in the overall withdrawal strategy? And so some considerations you're going to want to have here are, one is, how will this impact your premiums with the Affordable Care Act, assuming that you're retired before Medicare? Two, how might this impact your Social Security strategy? We talked about how that might impact that as well. Your view on tax rates is another consideration. And then your time frame for the money. But I think for a lot of us, if we have the flexibility, you could have potential tax savings that's quite significant. If you're able over 10 years or so to convert and save 10% on what the ultimate tax burden would be, and you have $1 million, that's a $100,000 difference or decrease in that tax liability that's sitting on your balance sheet that you don't really see because you don't count it that way. You could have substantial tax savings, and we're not counting the potential growth tax-free and the fact that you won't have to do RMDs forever after 70 and a half. So you can see how just some intentionality on withdrawal strategies or Roth conversions can equal a lot of money. So if you're working with an advisor, this may be a much more important lever to focus on than a fancy investment strategy. Think about that. These are the types of things that we have to think about more and more when we're in retirement or entering retirement. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of great education in the advisory world yet. There's some, but not many have taken advantage of it that think more about these type of tactical things that can have huge impacts as we're drawing money to rock retirement. All right, next week, what we're going to do is finish off this series by answering some of your questions. So if you happen to have a question, go ahead and email it to Nicole at wwkwealth.com, and she'll curate or collate those, and we'll dive into listener questions on managing IRAs, 401ks, and Roths. Now let's go get happy. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life. I can't believe Nicole is still hungover from her butter beer binge at Hogwarts. So she'll be joining us next week. So I want to talk about how to get happy. So I made a spur-of-the-moment purchase. Usually those can be really, really dangerous. I was down in Florida with my sister, and we were walking around, and we sat in some massage chairs. We were at actually an equestrian event, horse jumping, and we sat in these chairs, and we're like, oh, that is awesome. They put the demo mode on, played around with it for a while. Well, we both got one, and I had mine delivered back to Texas. I could afford it. The money was counted, but it was a little bit spur of the moment. And when that has happened to me in the past, I have had regret. buyer's remorse. Why did I do that? I need to be more intentional about thinking about things like that. I try to be big on intentional action, right? Well, I have no regret at all because I'm in that chair twice a day. My wife, who doesn't like massages, has been using it, although not lately because she's had back surgery. It is awesome. It was a good treat for myself and my family. We can afford it. And it was okay that it was spontaneous because we knew it was within our budget, so to speak. So it's okay to treat yourself, even if it's spontaneous, because I know spontaneity can be really hard to do when we want to be so intentional. So it's okay. You worked hard. Be spontaneous within reason, right? Now let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day goal, to set a baby step to create a great life. So in the next 7 days, I suggest if you are really near retirement to start looking at potential Roth conversions. Usually it's the year after you retire. See where your estimated income is going to be and what tax bracket that puts you in to see if you can start to build a little bit of a strategy to be able to do some strategic Roth conversions. Now, if you're a little ways out from retirement, start looking at ways to start building assets in the 3 buckets, the taxable, the tax deferred, and the tax free. The sooner you do that, the more flexibility you're going to have later in life. All right? So get going. All right, next week we are going to dive into listener questions on IRA, 401k, and Roth management. And we're going to talk about some great books that you can give your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, your grandchildren for graduation, whether that's high school or college. Good books that can help set them on a good path. Until next week, I hope you're well. Can't wait for Nicole to come back.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.